Hello everyone, this is Dr. Fox, and let's talk about the aorta and its branches. In this video, we'll discuss the aorta, including its parts, various vertebral levels of the parts, major branches, and the areas they supply. So the aorta has several major components. There is the ascending aorta, which exits from the left ventricle, then the arch of the aorta, which we can find in the superior mediastinum. And then the largest portion is the descending aorta, which has thoracic part, which is superior to the diaphragm, and an abdominal part, which is inferior to the diaphragm. That abdominal part is going to bifurcate around the fourth lumbar vertebrae into the common iliac arteries. So let's take a look at the ascending aorta, which is the beginning of systemic circulation. So the ascending aorta begins at the aortic valve, and above that, or immediately above that, are the aortic sinuses, or the sinuses of Valsalva. We can see a right sinus, a left sinus, and a non-coronary sinus. The right sinus is the origin for the RCA, the right coronary artery, whereas the left sinus is the origin for the left coronary artery. These coronary arteries are the only branches of the ascending aorta. From the ascending aorta, we enter into the arch of the aorta, aka the aortic arch. The aortic arch is at about the thoracic plane, which runs from the angle of the sternum, that angle of Louis, back to the intervertebral disc of T4, T5. We say that this arch is about at the level of T4, and then the descending aorta is going to begin at a level of T5. But let's take a look at the major branches of the arch of the aorta. And this can be quite variable, but typically the first branch is the largest, and it's called the brachiocephalic trunk. Brachio refers to brachial, so that's the arm, cephalic, the head. So we have some idea that the brachiocephalic trunk is going to serve an arm and the head. But how? Well, if we look, there are two major branches of the brachiocephalic trunk. There is the right subclavian artery and the right common carotid artery. And not to get ahead of ourselves, but there's going to be a left common carotid artery and a left subclavian artery branching off of the arch of the aorta. So we see that we have two subclavian arteries, two common carotid arteries. It just so happens that on the right side, those vessels are coming from that brachiocephalic trunk. And so brachiocephalic trunk is serving the right side of the head and neck via the right common carotid artery, and the right upper limb via the right subclavian artery. And then, as we've discussed, the next two branches are the left common carotid artery, serving the left side of the head and neck, and the left subclavian artery, which serves the left upper limb. From the arch of the aorta, we move to the descending aorta. The descending aorta has two distinct parts. Sometimes we call them parts, sometimes we just call them thoracic aorta and abdominal aorta. They are exactly the same in terms of that nomenclature. The thoracic part of the descending aorta begins at about the level of T5. And as we look, so there's the vertebral column there, we see that it takes more of a left-sided orientation within the thorax, specifically in the left posterior mediastinum. This thoracic part of the aorta is going to serve various thoracic viscera as well as the wall, as we'll see. And it ends at the aortic hiatus of the diaphragm, which is at about the level of T12. That's about the lowest extent that the diaphragm will take. So of the three hiatuses, caval, esophageal, and aortic, this one happens to be the lowest. That means then that the abdominal part of the aorta is going to begin at that aortic hiatus at about T12. So where thoracic aorta ends, abdominal aorta begins. And that abdominal aorta is going to have various branches, three major anterior branches, a celiac trunk, SMA, and IMA, several lateral visceral branches, such as renal arteries and gonadal arteries, and then very many parietal branches serving the body wall, so like inferior phrenic and lumbar arteries, etc. At about the level of the fourth lumbar vertebra, the abdominal aorta ends and we transition to the common iliac arteries on either side. So let's take a look at this thoracic aorta in greater detail. So we're starting off at about the level of T5, wherever the arch of the aorta ends, and we're finishing that off at about the level of T12. So thoracic aorta has various named branches. None of these we're going to test you on. The visceral branches are going to supply the bronchi. They're going to supply the pericardium. They're going to supply various elements of the mediastinum, as well as the esophagus. The parietal branches, so keep in mind parietal comes from peris, meaning wall, are going to supply intercostal spaces. So after we traverse the diaphragm, we're then going to enter the abdominal aorta. That abdominal aorta has various orientations of vessels. So if I were to just kind of draw it in cross section there, I will say posterior is there, anterior is there. Some of the branches will be anterior, and those will be visceral branches, which we'll discuss on this slide. Some of those branches will be lateral. Those will also be visceral branches. And some of those branches will be more posterolateral. And those are going to be the parietal branches, as we'll see. So let's start with the anteriorly oriented visceral branches. The first one, number one, with a bullet, right after we go through the diaphragm, we have the celiac trunk. That celiac trunk is about the level of T12 because that's about the level of the hiatus for the aorta. And it has three major branches. Those branches have other branches, but the celiac trunk is going to supply derivatives of the foregut. So we're talking about distal esophagus, stomach, and the proximal portions of the duodenum. So celiac serves the foregut. The next major branch is the superior mesenteric artery, or the SMA for short. The SMA is about the level of L1, and it is going to supply derivatives of the midgut. So we're talking about the distal duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, all the way up the ascending colon and about 2/3 of the way through the transverse colon, nearly to the splenic flexure. That's all supplied by superior mesenteric artery. So those are midgut derivatives. There are some anastomoses between the celiac trunk and the superior mesenteric artery, but we will not be going into that level of detail here. Next up, we have the inferior mesenteric artery. This is the smallest of those three branches. That's at about the level of L3. And the inferior mesenteric artery is going to serve the hindgut. So that would be the final third of the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum. And there will be anastomoses between superior and inferior mesenteric arteries, just as there are anastomoses between celiac and superior mesenteric artery branches. So these celiac, SMA, and IMA are how we supply the viscera of the abdominal cavity with blood. But there are other things to also supply. There are the viscera from lateral branches, and the major ones are the renal arteries. The renal arteries are nearly in line with the SMA, so they're also at about the level of L1. They serve the kidneys. Downstream from that, also some of the suprarenal glands. And then at about the level of L2, these are rather staggered. We have the gonadal arteries. The gonadal arteries are the major blood supply to the gonads, so either the ovaries or the testes. And then finally, we have parietal branches of the abdominal aorta. So we'll have branches that ascend up to the inferior surfaces of the hemidiaphragms. We have ones that are serving the lateral wall in that lumbar region, etc. And as we've said before, at about the level of L4, we bifurcate into the common iliac arteries. So let's assess our knowledge. The brachiocephalic trunk predominantly serves which areas of the body with blood? Head, neck, and upper limbs? That's a little too much. The left head and neck? No. The left head, neck, and upper limb? No. The right head and neck? In part, yes. The right head and neck and upper limb? Yes, that is the right answer because we have the right common carotid artery as well as the right subclavian artery. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video. Take care, all.